All right, I know, cor unum cohort, you were thinking, we've already gotten our money's worth on this philosophy thing, but wait, there's more. Let's ask another question about ideas. Let's ask a little more about where these ideas come from, and specifically, these ideas we have, can they be given a purely physical account, right? Is it possible to give a purely physical account of our ideas? Well, let's make that a little more specific. Let's talk about our sensations, right? Things like our sensations of color and what smells and tactile feelings, our sensory perceptions. Can they be completely explained exhaustively by a purely physical account of the world and of the mind? That is, what if there's no spirit? What if everything's just matter? What if everything's just atoms? Does that account for our sensations, our feelings, our consciousness, that kind of thing? Well, many philosophers have traditionally answered yes throughout history. Traditionally, philosophers in the Platonic, that is Plato, or Aristotelian, that is Aristotle, in their traditions have thought that sensations, right, seeing, hearing, smelling, that belongs to the body, right? And therefore, purely sensory perceptions and sensory consciousness could be entirely explained in terms of physical capacities, properties, and activities of our body, right? So you think about it, even a fox, right, out in the woods, who we would say doesn't have a spiritual soul, maybe, can do these things, right? Later on, of course, today, we would talk about states and activities of our brains, right? Purely physical. But philosophers in this tradition, the Platonic Aristotelian tradition, have generally thought that what we cannot explain in terms of purely physical activities and states is our ability to think abstractly. And we're going to return to that in the next video. Sure, maybe I can have sensations of smell, or that blue rubber ball just with physical gear, physical hardware, a brain. But what about the ability to think of the idea of catness, right? Or the color blue? In this tradition, they'd say, no, that kind of thing can't be explained purely in terms of physical activities. Well, another very old school of philosophy that exists today is called materialism. Widely embraced today, actually, maintains that all mental states, including sensations and our abstract thought or consciousness, can be explained in purely physical terms, usually in terms of brain activity and states. Well, and we'll look at some responses to this in the next video too, but in recent times, a number of contemporary philosophers have challenged both of these above views, questioning whether sensations, and in general the reality of subjective consciousness, can be explained in purely physical terms. And so we'll look at two examples of these, two thought experiments that challenge this idea. They want to add something to just a physical account of our ideas, of our sensations and our abstractions. One I'll go over, that is Thomas Nagel and the question, what is it like to be a bat? And then I'll save another one, which is Frank Jackson's thought experiment about Mary the color scientist. And there's poor Mary in her black and white world outside of the world of color. I'll save that for someone else's video. But let's talk about Thomas Nagel. There he is. And he wants to know, what is it like to be a bat? And what is it like for a bat to be a bat? Here's the idea. It's a thought experiment, right? And the whole idea here is, can a purely physical account of everything give us all of our ideas and sensations and consciousness? And Thomas Nagel is going to say no, because he wants to know, what's it like to be a bat? All right, so he says, imagine yourself to be some future super knowledgeable expert on bats and bat brains, such as you knew everything physical that there was to know about the brain of a bat. You're the future super expert on the physical knowledge of a brains of a bat. And in particular, you know everything physical that there was to know about the process of what's called echolocation, right? That's that particular mode of sensory perception whereby a bat can send out high-frequency sounds and pick up the echoes off of insects and other objects in the nearby environment and see them. Now, why he's doing this is because we don't experience that, right? We don't have echolocation, so we really don't know what it's like to be a bat with echolocation. So he says, well, supposing that you had all of that physical knowledge, all about the bat's brain and the physics of echolocation, he asks, and here's the key question, would you also know what it's like to be a bat from the bat's point of view, right? This is what's called qualia, this kind of subjective quality of being something. I know what it's like to be Mike Brummond, but I don't know what it's like to be a bat. And Nagel believes that even if you knew all of this stuff about the physical makeup of the bat's brain and echolocation, he believes that the obvious answer is that no, you would not know what it's like to be a bat. So he concludes, and here's the important part, he concludes that there is some reality left over the bat's subjective experience after you've listed all the physical elements that go into sensory perception, and therefore there is some non-physical aspect of sensory perception in particular and consciousness in general. He says, even if I knew all the physical qualities, I wouldn't know the subjective qualia. And so there must be a non-physical reality. And so at this point, I'll leave you to watch another video about poor Mary here stuck in the black and white room, Mary the color scientist. And it's a very similar thought experiment that brings out the same conclusion.